Join me or perish. Those are your options. Or you can leave, I guess. That's fine, too. Probably better than perishing. Honestly, it's join me or leave, I guess. It's definitely better options. Alright, here we go. So, this is the video I was talking about yesterday. You know, the whole fresh perspective, taking things for granted. So, this video is called Guild Wars 2 in 2022 is Ridiculous. Now, to be fair with that title, like, ridiculous is based off of ridicule. Like, typically speaking, ridiculous is a negative word. I came in fully expecting to nodders along with a lot of shit talk about Guild Wars 2. I've been playing it for 10 years. I'm jaded. I don't know if you know that, chat, but I'm a little jaded at times. So, I've forgotten the things that made me love the game in the first place, and nowadays I hyper-focus on the things I don't necessarily like. So I came in like, I'm just gonna nod along as he shits on the game, probably. Well, I was caught by surprise. And, it kind of refreshed my own view of the game, so I've been playing Guild Wars 2 again lately. All because of this fucking video. Critical acclaim. Oh wait, hold on, I got it muted, fuck. Alright, anyway, he says, game launched in 2012 to critical acclaim, then went on to launch 3 expansions, successful. Yeah, I got it. So, critical acclaim is a funny one. It did have quite a bit of, acclaim, but it never, like, fucking skyrocketed. Like, the game kind of came out at a weird time in MMOs, where there was a lot of other distractions. This was 10 years ago. To the month, 10 years ago. There was a lot going on, so it kind of got brushed to the side a bit, despite it did have, critical acclaim, so just a comment on that, I suppose. The release timing maybe wasn't optimal. And then it was kind of the first game to move away from the traditional idea of what an MMO is insofar as the Holy Trinity and combat mechanics. In the direction that it went. Like, other games have gone more action combat, even before Guild Wars 2. Like, I think Terra released before Guild Wars 2. But Guild Wars 2 was the first one to be like, fuck the Holy Trinity, who cares? Now, to be fair, Guild Wars 2 has also reminded me that I kind of like the Trinity, but it was a departure, so a lot of people weren't into it. They weren't sure about it.
Anniversary just around the corner. Today we take a deep dive to see what the game has to offer nearly a decade after release, exploring its world and getting to know some of its inhabitants on this epic journey. With some already so excited they forgot for a moment that they even have legs. My name's MitchManix, and this is my journey looking into Guild Wars 2 and why it quite frankly is ridiculous.
I killed a dude that wasn't animating yesterday.
As always, our journey begins with the character creator, where Guild Wars 2 sports a fairly middling amount of customization options when compared to its competitors. One thing...
Middling is generous. That is the worst part of Guild Wars 2 is a character customization. It's fucking atrocious. The faces are all dumb. The hairstyles are okay, especially since they've added to it consistently since release. So the hairstyles aren't as bad, but the faces are atrocious. There's actually a number of body styles, but it's definitely nowhere near as... I mean, it's better than WoW. I guess we could put it there. So I guess middling is probably fair, but it is definitely one of the major shortcomings of this fucking game, is the character creator. He's gonna demonstrate why soon.
That is clear right off the bat is how interesting its playable races are. The powerful looking Char bringing up PTSD from a certain ocean-based survival game. The Sylvari for anyone looking to cosplay as anime Bellsprout. And of course the far less exotic human that is so inclined you can customize to take on the world's evil as a giant armored baby.
Guild Wars 2 has a serious problem with faces. Particularly on the humans. The humans are definitely the worst showcase of it. This is not a meme. And this is definitely not the only face that hits this level of, oh god. The other races all have their own version too, more or less, but the humans got particularly swacked with the Barbie doll stick. The human faces all look incredibly fake and plastic. It's terrible, and you can certainly make yourself look like a giant baby. Bold choice, yeah. Anyway, character creation in Guild Wars is awful.
As for this grand adventure,
it's
we
not
will
great.
need a true legend. And with that, I proudly introduce the hero of this story, Disco Gizmo.
But at the same time, they also have the best character creation in the game. So it's a double-edged sword. I love the Asura. It's my favorite race in the game. And he's going to touch on one of the reasons why in a second, and I will iterate on that when he does.
Was revered of the Azura race, a necromancer armed with the deadly combination of disco and pure evil. With our selections confirmed, Guild Wars 2 sets up the starter zone and our journey with a cutscene showcasing not only its unique art style,
I do like
I
have always really liked the artistic cutscenes of Guild Wars 2.
Whatever the imbeciles
they're kind of
the
disconnected and abstract from the game world, but they're kind of nice. It's a little different, you know?
Taking our first steps into the world, we are
thrust
into
well
the character story,
and
tasked with controlling some defective technology that the Azura race pride themselves on crafting, immediately enhanced by the game's spoken dialogue, even for our pal Gizmo.
Zoja's rarely wrong. Don't tell her I said rarely, by the way.
Okay, his voice sounds very well put together. I was expecting something more like...
Guild Wars 2 actually has pretty good voice acting as well
that the detestable group The Inquest
and
is
almost
to blame
everything
for the
important
chaos
story-wise
tampering with the golems, and Disco Gizmo wastes no time in tracking down the Inquest prototype
especially
at the heart of the problem to take it down,
really good
using the game's highly mobile
especially
flavor of tab-targeting combat, with dodge rolling to avoid attacks, and certain skill buffs for flanking an enemy. On the subject of our pint-sized necro, what stood out for me immediately during this was how fluid and well-crafted the animations for playable characters are. The running, dodging, and jumping movement doing well at bolstering the game's visual experience so far after release.
Guild Wars 2 has some of the best MMO animations I've ever seen. They have some of the best game animations I've ever fucking seen. I've played a lot of games, and the animations in Guild Wars 2 are absolutely phenomenal. And it's the best part of playing an Asura, because it delivers an immense amount of personality to just the little character. Like, dodging with a two-handed weapon. Like, Asura hold the two-handed weapons up over their shoulder like this, you know, pretty like, and when they dodge with the, it's just fucking crazy. The Asura are especially well animated, which is why I love them so much, even though armor looks pretty fucking derpy on them because of their weird dimensions. Was that Gizmo from the Gremlins? It kind of looked like it, didn't it? He even makes a gremlin joke later, I think, if I remember right. But that might be the second video, actually.
And they are all dead. With the initial story missions concluded,
Rocks fall,
we set about
dies.
exploring the starter zone and getting involved in its opportunities for gear and XP. An experience, for me at least, that was incredibly enjoyable. Guild Wars 2, rather than drip-feeding the same drawn-out fetch quests as a single mode of early leveling, presents the player with a number of options, even in its first hour. I began helping one of the
Guild Wars 2
scientists
doesn't have go pick up the quest, go do the quest, go turn the quest back in. You go to an area, shit's happening in that area, you do it.
And worked my way through a jumping puzzle up to it for more
it oftentimes has
experience and a great
dialogue and
little
story
land,
shit going on.
followed by an NPC actually coming up and getting my attention.
Maybe you.
Recruiting and escorting me to a now newly available public event within the starting zone for even more rewards,
dynamic
all
events
leading to a very immersive MMO experience early on.
Yeah, there's just, you just fucking go out into the world and do shit.
Meeting and working alongside the
That's the leveling process, and it's far more enjoyable than quest circuits.
Laughter at the sight of Gizmo's ears migrating into his
again, another showcase
whenever he gets excited.
Of the good, great animations.
Journeying further into the game's tarnished coast continent, we stumble upon more of the Azura's captivating settlements and stop off to grab some supplies. While working up the side of a building to grab yet another vista, a whole crowd of players can be seen stampeding past, and without a second thought, the decision is made to join in whatever shenanigans is occurring, taking Gizmo on a seamlessly transitioning chain of world events, requiring our newly...
Keep in mind, this is a starter zone, level 1 to 15. This is the baby zone. And a lot of these people aren't babies. Another thing I like about Guild Wars 2 that I wish more games did, dynamic level scaling. I think ESO does it. ESO? I don't know about Final Fantasy or anything about in that, but you're scaled down to the level of the content you're in, which means at no point is anything ever trivial. Now, things do get easier because you got more stats because your armor has, you know, an additional stat set to it when you get to a higher level. So it's still easier than being on level for it, but it's not trivial, which is a nice touch. Although, for higher level characters, they do weirdly nerf your healing a bit, to the point where your healing is god-awful compared to somebody on level. Probably another balancing lever, or a bug that just hasn't been fixed in 10 years. I'm not sure which. But heals can be surprisingly useless for a downscaled high-level character. as I'm discovering playing my Ellie in the open world. Who really needs the healing?
Band of adventurers to complete a number of objectives before marching
I
and
can see some new
down
players in this pod, but I also see a lot of high-level players there.
With Gizmo unfortunately too busy staring at his map to find out where he had ended up to participate in.
Frog legs, anyone?
Ah, they killed the boss. Shit.
Then it's best we depart.
He got stuck.
It may not seem like a lot, but having little quips from the NPCs like that, whilst working through the world's events, really places them within the game's world, and makes the experience feel less like simply jumping on a train for some quick XP, and more like actual events, playing out across the game's landscapes. Oh, and of course, Giz had to go back and get that Vista.
Now, to be fair, when you've done the same event about 100 times, you are more or less jumping on for an XP train, but the first couple of times it's nice.
We return to our compatriots to continue the story,
Another good
getting
thing
a chance to meet more of the
game's
characters, and to get another flashback to a former terrifying adversary.
Jesus, calm down!
Soon after following the story, Gizmo is released into the wider world, getting a look at some of the truly awe-inspiring design of Guild Wars 2's largest cities and player hubs, visiting Ratu Sum for a chance to kick off the professions and explore the city's great use of verticality. As well as a little later the grand city of Lion's Arch, a truly amazing location, brimming with character and the ingenious idea to provide roller skates to the city's guard for quick deployment to duties. The game's story missions play out in chapters every 10 levels, with the idea being...
So, going back to that, not the animation thing, but going back to Lion's Arch, the irony here is that this is a remake of Lion's Arch, which objectively on its own looks good. It works. It's a little touristy feeling, but to be fair, that's kind of what Lion's Arch is. It's a travel destination. It's like a hub. Even in lore, it's like a trading hub and shit. So, but this is the second iteration. The first Lion's Arch was in lore destroyed and had to be rebuilt. It looked very different. And, you know, gamers don't like change. So, of course, everybody fucking hated it when the new one came in. To be fair, the old one definitely had more charm. But it was also more of a pain in the ass to navigate, so give and take a little. I think they're both good. The aquatic theme can be a little derpy at times, but, you know, I enjoy sitting on the octopus's face, so.
The grand city of Lion's Arch, a truly amazing
players generally did not like this change.
And the ingenious idea to provide roller skates
Nobody
to the
cares
city's
anymore,
guard for quick
obviously.
deployment to duties. The game's story missions play out in chapters every 10 levels, with the idea being exploring the land and exploiting the various opportunities for experience in between.
Worse.
After taking in the sights of Lion's Arch, I thought about putting the game to the test when it comes to having freedom when leveling. So decided instead of going just north of my previous leveling zone, to instead make the journey all the way over to Snowdon's Drifts, one of the other level 15 to 25 zones, across the land but located much further away from my Azura beginnings. Not just that, but I decided to go on foot, instead of locating what I imagine would be a quick portal to a location nearby, partially due to wanting to have an MMO exploration feeling, and partially because I am an idiot, with the latter being confirmed almost immediately, as while wandering through one of the higher level zones in between me and my destination, I somehow managed to get set up in a deadly ambush by a small child.
Damn you, Cricket!
But the world would have to throw more than that at Disco Gizmo before he gives up.
It's not the only,
and with a bit of luck, a very kind
going the
player,
opposite direction,
and with some deduction, I made it to the snow-tipped slopes of the Snowdon Drifts, venturing out, leveling up, and trying not to get mowed down by some particularly speedy player mounts.
That's not even speedy, bro. That thing could break like land speed records. That person doesn't know how to use that mount.
And interesting as I explored and leveled.
Especially since they just came down a hill. That thing should be boosting about 5 times the speed he was going at. It's insane.
When it comes to leveling specifically, I personally find that within a great experience, something is almost always sacrificed. What is incredibly impressive is that Guild Wars 2 manages to keep things so interesting, injecting zones with group events seamlessly flowing into each other with completionist and exploration-based activities, while at the same time keeping an entertaining,
that's one thing I like about
personal feeling narrative interweaving it all together.
You can constantly, like, just exploring the zone is how you play the game. Like, there's no quest circuits, there's no fucking optimized route. Well, I guess if you're going for world completion, hitting all the things, but just for like leveling up or getting your character through, like, you just go out and do shit, bro. You go out, you explore the zone, you find events here and there. Hell, there's events in 10 years of playing that when I go out and level a new character, I'm still finding new fucking events I didn't know existed. 10 years I've been playing the game. It's crazy. There's always something to find. Which is nice, and I like that because I like exploring. just kind of running around and doing shit. I like to be in the world, you know? That's one thing Guild Wars 2 does phenomenally, is just getting you in the world and letting you interact with it.
Disco ball at it.
And you too can help cleanse the land of impromptu, oversized arachnids. By dropping a like on the video if you enjoy it, and letting me know your thoughts down in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for a whole host more RPG greatness. It's free and really helps out small
issue regarding
YouTubers
class
like
balance, is that still
Since
I mean,
we've
it's an
past
MMO.
level 10,
There's always
we
class
unlock the
balance
ability to swap between two sets of weapons during combat. For those that are not
they're
aware,
always
Guild Wars 2 grants the player a set of
so.
abilities based on the current weapon equipped.
It's not.
For example,
it's not bad.
Gizmo's knife, when held in the main hand,
No worse
grants
than
access
WoW
to health
or
recovery and
Final
necromancer
Fantasy
abilities.
or ESO.
In contrast to
It's
his staff
MMO,
abilities
so.
that have more of a focus on area of effect attacks.
Nothing's
Not every
worthless.
class can
There's
use
no
every
classes
weapon,
that are so
but
bad.
that doesn't stop the
There's
game
no
in
point
providing a
using it.
huge range in terms
And there's
of
none
builds
that are
and
just so
playstyles,
far and away
especially when
better than
coupled with
everyone
the
else
class
that there's no point
abilities.
playing anything
Bar
else.
swapping will be familiar to anyone
Some
who's
are
played
better
the
than
Elder
others,
Scrolls
some are worse than
Online.
others, some excel in certain areas, some excel in
Indeed,
others.
and adds yet another layer to its
It's an
deep and
MMO.
satisfying combat mechanics. With the plan in place to make a voyage to a wayward zone once we'd outleveled the current, we set about working our way through the levels, with the mind to explore as much of the land as possible in the process, making sure to make a trip back each 10 levels to continue the personal story.
So, this is one thing I don't like about the way Guild Wars 2 sets up is set pieces and its architecture. This is this Divinity's Reach? Yeah, this is Rurikton? Yeah, Rurikton in Divinity's Reach. These, and this has become even more apparent with flying mounts, these are fucking tiny. They use forced perspective gimmicks to make things seem bigger than they are. And to make things feel like more city-oriented. These are fucking tiny. Like, his character, if you got up to this, is probably about the same fucking size as this, maybe half the size. Like, that's tiny when you actually get up to it. One thing that can kind of throw you off, especially now that you can kind of get height and elevation with mounts and stuff. I mean, it worked out well enough in the base game when the game first came out, but it definitely shows its age these days with visual gimmicks like this. But I guess it does kind of sell the illusion of the place being bigger than it actually is, particularly when you're on the ground in the buildings and you're only getting glimpses of it and stuff. But yeah, it's just these are tiny. Do not let them fool you. Those are tiny.
First experience with the game's first-person camera feature. Oh, cool! You can go first person. Yes, look, I go. We will never speak of this again. Upon reaching level 40,
they also have an
first
action
dungeons
camera you
were
can do in
unlocked,
first person.
and Gizmo, leaving no stone
Or third
unturned,
even.
rounded up a group using the game's party finder tools. Dungeons
Which
are available
works
in two
surprisingly well,
difficulty
honestly,
modes,
depending on your
story
class.
and explorable. With the
And
latter
can be fun to
available
do,
after
because then
completing the
your
story
basic
mode
attack
option,
is just time
and
to
cleverly
clicking
covers the aftermath of the
your
story
mouse
mode,
and
featuring branching paths to
stuff like
take,
that.
increased
It's not too bad.
difficulty, and currency to purchase unique
They added
armor
that
and
in a
weapons
few years ago.
modeled according to the theme of the dungeon. The dungeons were great for the most part, with some amazing looking locations, good lengths, and rewards both in XP and gear to justify seeking them out. The only real downside comes when attempting a first playthrough with the mind to play out all the cutscenes covering the story of the instance. In my experience, there wasn't exactly
There's a reason for this. I'll let him finish his
a
thought.
huge
but
number
there's a
of groups
reason.
being formed for the dungeon runs, so encountered a bit of a mixed bag. Players would hang around for first-timers to enjoy the story, or steamroll ahead clearing most of it by themselves, even when forming a group with a story focus stated. I can't help but wish that the game featured more than the 9 included, but as a whole, the dungeons were yet another example of Guild Wars 2 including another staple of a great MMORPG, and doing it well. With yet
Okay, so there's some comments I gotta make on that. There's only 9 dungeons for a reason. The game's engine, when it first came out, is the definition of spaghetti code. It still is today, but they've done a lot to fix it up so it's not as terrible. But Guild Wars 2 engine was their Guild Wars 1 engine, which at the time of release was already a decade old. They just tooled it up, retweaked it, duct taped some new features and mechanics to it, some extra bells and whistles, and then we're like, we got an engine, baby. And it shows. Like, this game's engine has never worked quite properly. And when one thing changes, it has a tendency to break other things. Dungeons were a nightmare for them in the early days. Like, anytime they fixed something or added something or changed something, dungeons across the board would just start breaking in wild ways. And it was always one step forward, 2 steps back with trying to keep dungeons functional. So they got to the point where they just gave up. So there's only 9 dungeons because dungeons are defunct content. They're no longer being updated. If there's a particularly egregious bug that pops up that prevents you from completing them, they get around to fixing it. But there's no new dungeon content in that capacity, in that style. Now, the dungeons were an interesting idea with where you pick your path, but honestly, most of that ended up getting optimized. Certain paths didn't get run because they were too hard. Certain paths were just chain spammed because they were super quick and profitable. The COF Path 1 meta, for example. Path 1, Path 2. But yeah, he's going to discover this in his second video when he jumps into the first expansion, but dungeons were replaced, which is why there's only 9, and nothing was ever really done with them. They were replaced with content called fractals, which are kind of like dungeons, but designed on a slightly smaller scale. And they're better implemented with the changes to the engine that have happened since then, and surprisingly, rarely break. They actually run pretty well and almost never have major issues. So I guess, you know, they switched to fractals instead, which are basically dungeons, just slightly shorter and more detached from the in-game world. Like, in-game lore doesn't really play out in fractals, because it's more hypothetical, timey-wimey stuff. Or things that aren't happening, or did happen, or maybe didn't quite happen that way, or will maybe happen this way, but also probably not happen. Although lately, the more recent fractals have been more dungeon length. Like, they've been getting longer and more involved, which is cool, because I like that, although the player base doesn't because they're used to short fractals. Mixed bag on that one, but that's the reason why dungeons are how they are. So the people running dungeons are just running it for some quick daily gold. So it's people who just want to get in and just push through, get it done, get their gold, move on. Because you do get a gold reward for completing paths. They were a good idea. They were an interesting implementation for dungeons. The only other game I've seen do dungeons in a similar fashion is Lord of the Rings Online, where you just go in and the dungeon's just kind of open-ended. Like, there's no direct path through the dungeon. In Lord of the Rings Online, you can go this way, you can go this way, you can go that way, and nothing matters. You just fucking go through and do the dungeon. There's no final boss of the dungeon, or there's a couple final bosses depending which way you go, or you can hit all the final bosses if you really want to spend a while in there. Dungeons in Lord of the Rings Online were fucking massive. They were huge. They were an experience. I loved them. There weren't quite enough of them. This is kind of the same way. You pick a path. There's a couple different paths. Each path works like its own dungeon within the theme and design of it. It was interesting. But with the engine as much of a mess as it was in the early days, it didn't really work out well. That and their lead dungeon designer ended up leaving a couple of years after launch, and yeah, anyway.
Another activity to keep us busy, it was on through the levels.
I used to play a lot.
Land every level range, picking up hero points to spend on abilities and stat points, which are given out after completing their respective short open world challenges, while taking time to dive back into the story, which continued to expand in scale, as well as its cast of interesting characters.
Oh, and oh my god, that is disturbing.
My journey taking me across snowy fields to enchanted forests, dank swamps to mechanical cities, whilst constantly jumping in and out of clearing content solo and with others. I can't express how much of a breath of fresh air it was, leveling in this game, with so much variety in its gameplay, some truly outstanding environmental design.
You also have flexibility of leveling. You can also level through PvP,
and ambient sounds
which
that allow the
normalizes
really
things except for player experience, obviously.
To get that feeling of
or you can also level up in World v World, which does normalize your level and your stats to a degree, but your gear still matters there. So. But still.
After finally reaching the base game
you have
cap
a lot of
80,
choices in leveling
it was
up
time
too,
to grab some
nice.
epic gear upgrades, expand into my class specialization, Reaper, as well of course kit Gizmo out with a heart-stopping new drip. Ready to dive into some of the game's more late-game orientated offerings. Raiding was first up, after making a trip to the Aerodrome, a location within Lion's Arch specifically used for players looking for groups. Raiding being split into two channels, one for training and one for experienced players, I got a chance to see what it has to offer. And to my delight, found that the game really doesn't pull any punches.
Honestly, the raids, they're not like super tight and difficult because there's no holy well, there's kind of a soft trinity.
Next up was a game mode that some state as being Guild Wars 2's.
There's no holy, like, hard line holy trinity. Like, there's no taunt mechanics. There's some light threat mechanics depending on your defensive stats and enemy AI. But for the most part, They can't make raids a super, like, hardcore, really tightened up difficulty like you can in, say, World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy, simply because of the way the mechanics work out. So they're not like that hardcore challenge. Like, casuals can raid fairly effectively. It takes them a little longer to figure things out. Things are a little more challenging for them for certain. But yeah, like, raids aren't super hardcore challenging in Guild Wars 2 due to the design of the game. But they are really well done, and they are kind of fun, so yeah. Plays out as it is. Oh god, World v. World.
Its finest accomplishment, that being its truly massive world versus world PvP
and
game
where its engine completely shits the bed.
Player and player versus environment
in the worst
elements.
possible way.
Besieging
I love
keeps
World
and
v.
towers
World,
with
but
siege
god
equipment.
damn, the game can't handle it.
Battling over resource camps and completing PvE type content to level up in the world rank.
It's gotten a lot better, but it's still not perfect.
As far as endgame activities go,
the
I can see
engine
this
is
mode
just
adding
not good
endless
for
amounts
this
of
game
hours
mode.
to those that get a kick out of this type of large-scale warfare, especially with
It is
such
fun,
huge
though.
and diverse maps on offer.
Especially if you like
One
attacking
thing
the
I
front
will
door.
recommend, though, for anyone looking to jump in, would be to get a mount first, as for more times than not, poor Gizmo here was left in the dust as his
No, you
allies
can't get a
marched
mount
into
first.
battle.
Only one mount can be used in World v. World, and you have to unlock it
Now
through
I know
World
what
v.
you may
World.
be thinking.
The upside
Why
is,
in
if anyone else has a mount,
2022
they can help
is
give
Guild
you the
Wars 2
speed to
ridiculous?
keep up with the group.
I'll tell
But
you why.
you got to be
At
next to
nearly
somebody
every
with a mount
turn
when
during
you
my
start
time
running.
with the game, Guild Wars 2 handed me an experience that felt worthwhile, incredibly entertaining, and rich with features and atmosphere. Now I'm always
Does have
mindful
good
to look out
atmosphere.
for elements where a game doesn't quite deliver to give the best report possible, and Guild Wars 2's ability to consistently provide such great experiences across the board
This is the
quite
game's
frankly
theme song playing in the
ridiculous.
background.
And that's without mentioning the fact that the
Which
game
is really
doesn't
good,
have
by
any
the way.
enforced subscription
Fear
model,
not this night.
and as far as I could see,
It's a
isn't
pretty
littered with
pog song.
pay-to-win microtransactions. If you want a place to lose yourself in an RPG open world, this game has it in spades.
Because the entire
If you
game
want one of
is
the best
pretty much the
playgrounds to
world.
roam
So
around
you're
with
always
friends
out in the
for
world
PvP
doing
or
shit.
PvE,
So
then this game nails
if you
that.
enjoy being
If
in
you
an
are a
MMO
completionist
world,
with a thirst to
this
check
is probably
every
the
cliff
best
edge
game
and
for
find every hidden away location, this game will not only give you that in insane amounts, but also reward you massively for doing it. Which is an important point, that so many options for leveling especially give out worthwhile amounts of experience, not leading to players feeling forced to pick one or the other, so to truly set out to do what they want to do. The sheer amount of elements that Guild Wars 2 does well is staggering, bringing me back again, saying
It
that
does
this game
have
doesn't
things
get
it
more
doesn't do
attention
well,
for this
though.
is
Like,
ridiculous.
he
to me.
doesn't necessarily
The game
stumble
even
into them because
features
a lot of
both
them appear
explorable
towards the end
underwater
game.
zones, as well
There-
as having its own combat system built around it, because of course it does.
This is one of them. The underwater combat in Guild Wars 2, while he is right, it is designed around being underwater, it's also a meme and nobody fucking likes it. Everyone hates it. Like, underwater combat is never going to be fun. Ever. Yeah. So while he's technically correct here, they did kind of create it's not just land combat underwater. Underwater combat does change a lot of things. It still sucks is the problem, which is why Guild Wars 2 has not released any meaningful underwater content in 10 years. Period. Carry on.
Give the game a feeling that it's
one
overflowing with
visual
areas
effect.
to explore and activities to get involved in. The game, of course, has its shortcomings, such as its dated visuals that I'm sure will turn
they're
away
dated.
those that have
They're not
justifiably
awful,
become
but
more
they are
accustomed to
dated.
the more visually appealing contemporary offerings. A lack of player housing, and its crafting that, although ticking all the boxes by most standards, does lack
I
the
hate
more
crafting
advanced
in this game.
dynamics. The game
Mostly 'cause of the UI. The UI
brought
is
to the
fucking
table with
atrocious
its
for
professional
crafting.
system. Simply
It's
said,
terrible.
that if you are an MMO fan and you are yet to try Guild Wars
It's
2,
XCOM too
then I
bad.
highly recommend you give the game a try. As for me, it without a doubt sits as one of the best experiences the genre has to offer. So much so that if enough of you beautiful people like the video, then we may have to continue Disco Gizmo's journey into a certain newly discovered dragon-toting expansion. But as for right now, I can't
Spoiler
help but feel
alert.
that I may stick around a while in the world
Enough
of
people
Tyria,
wanted to see more.
as
so
even 10 years
he does
later,
have a second video.
it is one hell of a place to be.
We're not gonna watch that one, but if you want to see more about the game, check out the first expansion. You can go ahead and watch it on your own. MitchManix, YouTube, great like, even outside of just talking about Guild Wars 2 specifically, it's well edited, it's funny. You know, like, this is good YouTube content here, just in general. Like, yeah, I mean, He does stuff for other RPGs, other MMOs, other styles of game and stuff. So if you're interested in checking out the channel in general, there's a link to it. Feel free. Like I said, they have a second Guild Wars 2 video about the first expansion, which is also a good one. If you're interested in the game, I highly recommend you check it out. And they will probably do more with the other expansions. Path of Fire is probably next. Anyway, it's a good channel. Check it out. I like their stuff.